Welcome to Channel Y. I'm Ramona Singh.
Hello everyone, this is Yadoo and I'm the group editor at Y Media.
How can you up your game?
How you can be the best version of you. What brings happiness to life? Ramona ji, what brings happiness to your life?
How do you create your best life? How do you create your best life?
What is important to you? Money or happiness?
Join us every Sunday at 10 a.m., 4 p.m., and 10 p.m. for Food for Thought.
Keep watching Channel Y.
Hello and welcome to Food for Thought. I am your host, Ramona Singh. It's always a pleasure to spend this time with you and talk about issues that affect you in so many different ways, whether it's your psyche or your emotions. And we have these discussions that are of matter of the heart. And of course, today is another very important topic. And of course, all throughout your life, you've probably heard about somebody being egotistical or somebody saying, well, that's your ego. And maybe perhaps you haven't really thought about what does the ego mean or what type of role does it play in your life. So today we're actually going to be talking about the ego and how to manage it. And of course, joining me is Yadoo, who is the group editor of Y Media. Hello, how are you?
I'm doing, Ramona ji, doing great as always. How are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
So nice to have you here once again on our Food for Thought. It's always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. So what do you think about the ego? I think this is a topic that, we've always heard of the term ego, and it's like, what does it mean? Am I showing more ego or less ego? How do I manage it? And so there's so many feelings when you hear about the term ego. And so I think it's going to be a fabulous conversation to have today.
Sure. And I think if there is one thing that we can work immediately, and I've seen so many successful people having the opposite of ego, humility. And many people, attitude, it's a very important term, as much as we could take this lightly. But I think having ego in your attitude, that could be a big stumbling block in your careers, in your personal life, everywhere. And of course, if you are heading towards the path of spirituality as well. So ego could be a big stumbling block, and I'm sure we're going to learn today from you what actually is ego and how can we work on that. What's your take on this one?
Well, I think it's really important, and what I'll do is I'll go to where psychology refers to what the ego is and how it's a function of the mind, aside also with the id, the ego, and the superego, and I'll break down what the three of them are, and then of course we'll go through some of the examples, and some of the times maybe we felt all of them. And I think when we break down what these three components of your psyche, and this was brought out by Sigmund Freud, of course, Freud, very famous and lots of contribution to psychology, modern day. So just breaking it down, so the id is your primitive part of your psyche. The id is responsible for what you want to do, which is very irrational. It's very impulsive. So when you want to buy something, or when it's sexual desire, actually, instant gratification. Sometimes when you want to do something immediately, that's your id. And so a lot of people sometimes think could be ego. Where the ego plays into this is ego plays the role of managing what the id wants, which is I want it this, I want it now, I want instant gratification, just something that will create stimulus, right? I want to eat this right now, I have a craving for this or that, so that's the id. So the ego manages what the id wants, the internal desire, with the external world and what is appropriate in showing that behavior. Because, as an adult, if you're just driven by your id and you act on your id all the time, then you could just imagine what kind of a life you'd be living and how people would perceive you and the type of relationships you'd have. So the ego tries to find the balance. The ego is actually the rational part of that. And then you also have the superego, and that is your internal morals and ethics. So the three of them have this dance in your psyche to make sure that they're responsible for your thoughts, your feelings, your behavior. And of course you want to have a nice balance of everything, because somebody who's too much on the superego, then they're really having a lot of boundaries for themselves and perhaps not really living. Whereas your id, is, the rebellious, you could say, if you were going to cast characters of, these three parts of this psyche, your id also there's good in it because it's part of your biology. It's part of your instincts. This is something that you're born with. You cannot change it. That's why the ego plays the balancing act of the two, where you can't just be so much on your superego because you're not really going to live life, and you can't really be on your id because your id just wants what it wants right now without thinking about consequences, the aftermath, what it could mean. It's not worried about those things. But your id can also be that creative spark, that where you're that just kind of pushes that feeling forward, where you want to do something, get excited. But most times you hear, when you want to, let's just say, make an impulsive purchase, they say, well, somebody tells you better sleep on it and see how you feel tomorrow, or give it a few days before you do this. And usually by the next day or 3 days down the road, maybe you have a different feeling about things. That's because you have left enough time for the feeling of your id to subside, meaning you're not giving in to instant gratification. So that's the three parts, and of course we'll go into more detail about the ego and all the rest.
Wow, very nicely explained. Yeah, I think we've discussed this earlier as well, and I'm sure we read that in many religious textbooks as well. Whether it's Kam, Krodh, Lobh, Moh, Hankar. So whether it's greed, whether it's lust, whether it's anger, and of course ego as well. These are the things I feel that you cannot really, finish them. It's impossible. It's inherent in almost all of us. All these things: greed, lust, jealousy, ego, all these things, anger, all these things are inherent in us. The only thing is, as we discussed in a previous episode, is how do we strive to be in our zone zero? So zone zero would simply mean that whether all these things, including ego, 10 being that yes, someone who's very egoistic, and 0 being zero ego, which is not possible, I think. Maybe some Brahmgyanis or maybe some really saints. This is a PhD level thing, I would say. So they could possibly go to zone zero for ego or for any other things. But since I already said it, I think so it cannot be brought down to 0. But if it's higher in anybody, I think we can channelize it. The way I look at things, that we can channelize. You just mentioned a very good point that yes, id, ego, I think it's good. So I think we can channelize it, but I don't think so we can, and of course we'll talk how we can channelize it further. But I think that's all we can do.
Yes, absolutely. It's important to realize that you need a healthy level of ego, because otherwise you would have low self-esteem. You'd suffer from, all those other feelings of feeling less worthy, and also showing up in that way, which will not be very conducive for, your relationships, for how you perceive yourself, what you put out into the world. It wouldn't necessarily be the most positive energy there, of course. So that's very important. The other thing is that...
Sorry to interrupt. I wanted to understand from you.
Yeah.
Explain me this thing. You just use the word self-esteem.
Yeah.
What is the difference between self-esteem, self-respect, or where do we draw that line, or an ego, please?
On an ego?
Yeah.
Well, so when a healthy, balanced ego is when you can appreciate your accomplishments or certain things that you do well, and you know what your character is, which is really contributed to also by the superego, and also knowing how well you manage your id. And then there is the ego boost, as you cultural reference, or when you're egotistical, another cultural reference is when you're so driven by, being perceived a certain way, and you thrust yourself onto perhaps the people around your society, or the level of attention you to seek, or if you're too self-absorbed, or way too much, about yourself and not really looking outside of yourself, then that's an imbalance of your ego, driven very strongly by your id and your need for the constant and instant gratification. So your self-esteem comes from having that balance of knowing who you are, knowing the good qualities, but also knowing what you need to work on, your weaknesses, being open to what other people have to say, and being open to other people's feelings. And there's a level of humility that comes in that, and that's very important. But that's why that it's so important to have that balance to contribute to your self-esteem.
All right. So that means ego, if it's balanced or channelized, as I was saying, channelized in a proper way, and adding a lot of humility to it, so then we're driven towards self-esteem.
Yes, and it's important to have a good self-esteem, because otherwise you would, not have proper boundaries in life, right? Yeah. You could be somebody who's maybe not taking care of yourself. If you don't have a healthy level of self-esteem, are you taking care of your health? Are you eating right? Are you getting proper activity? How do you relate to other people? That's another thing. How are you in your relationships? If you're not having healthy boundaries in your relationships, do you feel most taken advantage of, or do you feel like you're in toxic situations, or are you overextending yourself, which leads to having less energy for yourself? You could have all those imbalances, not unbalanced, imbalances, because you don't have that healthy level of self-esteem for yourself. Or if other people are being critical about you, or saying, not such kind things to you, do you believe it right away? Because if you have a level of self-esteem, there's certain things that you can just shrug off, and know that if you hear something not so kind, that perhaps that person is just projecting what they're feeling, or they're being triggered. It has nothing to do with you. So that really helps you with your self-esteem in so many ways. I'll give you the perfect example. And I said this to many times before, when I was talking to my friends, and I think it's appropriate to mention it right now. So if I had an imbalance of my self-esteem and I was feeling very insecure, but I want to show the world that, something that as a front, as what would be perceived to other people outside of myself, then I would be hiding an insecurity. But if I were to let's just say, brag about accomplishments, or what I have, what I don't have, it could be either or, based on the scale of how much you have or how much you don't have. But if that's what you're showing, it's usually to distract away from an insecurity that you feel, and then you're less likely to be able to, you're always going for more of that attention, or for more of that brag. And I've always made this comment that I don't have to brag about being a woman. I just simply am a woman. So I wouldn't necessarily say, being a woman, or I'm a woman, did you not notice I'm, I don't say it, because I already feel it. So it skips my mind to even acknowledge it, because it is as it is. And that's part of, me acknowledging that you could even attribute that to having a balanced level of self-esteem, which is balancing out my ego. The more I balance out my ego, meaning keeping my id to a degree where I still give it what it needs to in an appropriate way, that's culturally appropriate in society, and also have a good superego, which is my ethics, my morals, based on my cultural upbringing, or my values from my family or religion, or whatever the case is, or through my own concepts and thoughts, then the more my self-esteem gets to a better place, because then I'm not, if you're just id-driven, you'll ruin so many relationships. If you want to do what you want to do, when you want to do it, how you want to do it, it doesn't matter on anything else, and you'll ruin a lot of relationships for yourself. You'll ruin a lot of your own circumstances, if that's the case. And so that balance is really key to being able to have a balanced life. I think that's something that we always talk about. Well, how do you have a balanced life? There's so many things you could have, but you got to have your mind, your thoughts, your feelings balanced out. And so these three are really the key components. So now that you're aware of the three things, now if you're saying something or doing something, you know it's your id pushing you, or if it's your super ego, which is holding you too reserved and not letting you, perhaps learn. Because sometimes when you have a high level of ethics, morals, or boundaries, or whatever the rules you have for yourself, it also can prevent you from learning new things as well, or experimenting, or being spontaneous, for example. Of course, I'm giving various different examples just to be able to clarify these different aspects of the psyche, but now you know when it comes up and what's driving you, what's not, so you know what to do, which helps, I think, managing being human.
Yeah, a very good points that you made, but at a very basic level, I think if you're having any issues in managing good relationship, if you're having any issues, having a good career, if you're having any issues in being a good business person, so yes, ego could be one of the issues that you've not really channelized, you've not really managed ego. And I think, as you just mentioned, you could lose a lot of colleagues, good friends, maybe good business contracts, so many other reasons, because at many times when you're doing business with someone, before you're even selling the product, you're selling yourself, because people would do business with you only if they like you. Most of the time that does happen. So I think if you're not properly managing your ego, yes, it does become a major stumbling block. So we're going to talk more about that, and also we're going to figure out where is your ego scale. So we'll talk about that. How can you really measure your ego scale? Because there is no such thing in the world like, okay, you can measure what's the heart rate. You have devices for that. What's the glucose level? What's the blood pressure level? There's so many other things, the cholesterol level, so many other things you can measure. But you don't have anything to measure what's your ego level. But certainly, as we've given some indications, we'll discuss more how you can know on a scale of 0 being absolutely no ego and 10 being your ego has really taken over you and you'll face lots of troubles because of that. How you can really measure that, how you can really gauge that, what's the metric for that? We'll talk about that.
Absolutely. I think this is exciting, because I think the more you know about yourself and how your mind works, how your psyche works, the more you know, the more it empowers you, I think, to make better decisions, to understand what's happening with yourself, around you. And, everything that's happening around you is just a mirror of what's in your psyche. So if you're having wonderful relationships, wonderful experiences, beautiful coincidences, if you may say, that's because you're at peace in your thoughts, in your mind, in your heart. It's really, your external world is a reflection of what's going on inside. So if you have, certain troubles on the external world, or if certain things feel difficult or chaotic, it's really because of what's going on inside. So the more time you spend in understanding all of these aspects, like we talked about, the conscious and the subconscious, and there's also the God conscious, which we can talk about. Understanding those things, and then your id, your ego, and your superego will really help you know what you're leaning towards, when you're reacting, when you should not react the same way, or how to properly gauge yourself in the path you're going to go. And of course, there's a theory that I learned from Jeff Bezos, and he referenced this theory, which is the regret minimization theory. And he says that he applies it in his work. And the regret minimization theory is that you want to make sure that you, as it says in the term, that you want to minimize your regrets in the future by taking correct steps today. So in the future, you do not have, many regrets. So you want to minimize the impact of those regrets. And of course, when it comes to business, there's models that you can put into place and equations and work those things out. But then there's also, you can apply that to your life. And if you want to immediately, anybody could come up with an example. If you want to minimize your risk of heart disease, what do? To minimize that, what you would do today. So you could, and that's why I think talking about these topics when it comes to your mind, it's so important to know how it works because you control it. It shouldn't control you. And that's why people talk about meditation or journaling or gratitude and all those things to help you balance those things out. It's so important to just know what they are, what they're called, what do they do, and so you can become the master of your mind.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you know, one thing I can certainly say is that if you're not managing your ego, or if you're not channelizing, I will always use the word manage or channelizing your ego rather than doing anything else, because you cannot really finish your ego, or it cannot be zero. So if you're not properly managing or channelizing your ego, you'll definitely have massive challenges in building good relationships at home, any friendly relationship, maybe with your spouse, or even at business, in your career, everywhere. And if you have channelized and managed your ego very well, obviously we'll discuss that later, that you're very humble, humility is a very important value in you, then all these things, they start falling in place. And I think there'll be many indicators that if you're having ego, and you can correct me.
Like an imbalanced ego, you mean?
Imbalanced
Because
ego.
a good balance of ego
Yeah.
is necessary, because the ego is still very rational.
Rational.
It's the id that's irrational.
That's irrational.
So what I think it would be interesting as I was looking at all this for this discussion, then it made me think about how technology has really. I was thinking about the science of selling, right, and like copyright and how you advertise, and given that we're on this platform, how advertisers will kind of drive the desire of the id. You see something in an ad, or a product placement in a reality show, or whatever the case is, in a movie, and then you're driven by, like, how many people have watched the movie Speed and then felt like they wanted to get into their car and drive really fast? That's your id that wants that adrenaline rush. That's your id. That's not your ego. That's your id. That's not your superego. Now you know where it's coming from in your psyche. So I was thinking about what advertisers do to really bring out the desires and get impulsive purchases, because there's so many things you've probably purchased that you don't use. At the time you were very excited about it, maybe you played with it, and then you just put it aside, and that was your id. You fulfilled the desire for it, of that instant gratification. I must have it. It must be in my collection. I must hold it. I must look at it. It must be mine. And then all of a sudden it loses its value because that was id driven. So I was thinking about a couple of things. So for example, before, like if you didn't cook at home, if you didn't go to a restaurant to eat, then your only options were like pizza to order, like maybe some Chinese food, maybe some Indian food, but you didn't have the array of what you have with like Uber Eats, or some of the other providers that are able to bring you food from your best restaurants, your favorite restaurants. So that was another way I was looking at, like how technology and the way we live today has really serves our id, right? And then I was thinking about, like, for example, in the past, when you wanted to meet somebody, and if you weren't being like in a arranged marriage situation, or if you were going to go and find your own partner, and if it wasn't through family or friends, then you would have to go to an establishment of some sort and really put the effort into meeting new people. And sometimes, I guess culturally, it was always heavy on males breaking the ice and approaching a female. Like, I think that's how it used to be culturally, and then things changed, and men and women will talk and get to know each other. But then you fast forward with with technology and how we use it in our lives, and then you have apps like Tinder, for example, where you can just swipe left or right, and you can instantly meet somebody in the very closest vicinity who, because of a swipe, has agreed to see you. So that's id driven as well. So it's very interesting to look at how our lives have changed based on technology, or based on what we're just accustomed to now, and the luxury of it all, and is it helping us balance our ego or not?
Wow, amazing. And as you were just mentioning, I think ego and unchannelized ego in a proper way, or not properly managed ego, will definitely create lots of challenges. It doesn't come by itself. I think we start being judgmental. I think we start comparing people. Jealousy could be another factor. Anger, it could accompany anger as well. You're not contented, you're not satisfied, and so many other issues could come up only because we have not managed our ego properly or not channelized it properly. And I think you're right, and I have a question for you here as well. As you were just mentioning, because in today's day and age, in social media, there's a lot of comparison. Oh, earlier, okay, somebody had bought a car or anything else, or even a dress for that matter, or anything. They would just have the car in their driveway, and unless you don't see them or don't visit them, you're not going to see that. But here we are, everything is splashed over all over on the social media. So you look at that, and suddenly if your ego is not channelized or managed, it could be a temptation. Why not?
Yeah.
So comparison, being judgmental, jealousy, greed, ego, all these things, they come in package.
Yeah, I feel like the credit system, having a credit card.
Okay.
Like if countries that didn't have credit cards, if you could afford to buy something or have an experience or go on a vacation, then you'd have to have the currency, the money to do it. And then, but countries where you have access to a credit limit, it's very easy to address your id immediately. Well, I want to go on a vacation, I can't afford it, but I have a lot, credit, and I can just put on my credit card, for example. So when you have social media and then you see, all the things that we have and all the things we put on display, whether it's a flashy car or whatever the case is, then that drives other people, and their id, because it is biology. You're born with your id. It's like your instincts. It's irrational. It wants what it wants. A baby wants food, it'll cry, right? If it needs to go to the restroom, it'll go. It's not going to wait to go to the washroom. Like it's id. A baby is that, and then your ego is developed. So you have your id. You're born with it, and then your ego is developed through early childhood experiences. Who are your parents? What did they teach you? If you cried for something and you got into trouble, then you learn not to do it, because remember, the ego is the rational part of the psyche that says, well, how do I get what I want, that my id wants right now, by also managing what is appropriate in society. So what are those rules that your parents created, or when you started school, and all of that? So it's also important, because however your behavior is being met, if you cry, sometimes now if a child cries, the parent will give them something fast. So they've learned, if I cry, I'll get my iPad. If I cry, I'll get the candy, not the opposite. So, so that's all part of teaching their ego how to manage what they want right now with what society will give them. The other aspects of developing your ego is, the social and cultural influences. So what country do you live in? It's very different if you live in like Asia versus North America or Europe. Very different cultures, and so what city are you born in, or what are your socioeconomic standards, and all of those things contribute to your ego. And then there's of course the feedback, which is what I explained based on how, let's just say when you were young and you had a girlfriend, not that I'm saying you did, but I'm just giving an example, and you said, I'm going to call you, and then you don't call her for 3 days, and then you call her, she gets mad at you. That's feedback. You learn, if I say I'm going to do something, I will do it the same day. Things like that. That's feedback. If I don't study, and I'm bringing up things from a very young phase, because this is what contributes to how you respond to things as an adult. What's appropriate? What's the rules of engagement? If you don't study and if you don't get a good grade, what do you do? Everything has consequences, and you realize that. For example, when you're young and you have an exam, but you'd rather go out with your friends, or you rather watch a movie, that's your id. Your id wants to go out with its friends. Your id wants to watch that movie. So how do you manage? Your ego says, wait a minute. How are we going to manage going through this exam tomorrow and passing, so the feedback that I'm going to get from my parents isn't going to be so bad? So ego is very important, but how do you manage it in a way to have a balanced level of ego, so you're getting what you want in life, but you're not all about yourself and just me, it's my world, my time, it's my show, so there's that aspect of it too.
Yeah, and you're right. And these days we get influenced by watching Dubai Bling, New York Bling.
Absolutely.
You
That's
know,
all id. Those are id shows.
Those are
ID.
id
Yeah.
shows?
Yeah, id shows. And that's so yeah, id is ID and ego, ego. Yes, those are all id driven shows.
Driven shows, yeah. So when you watch all those things, they do influence, as you were just mentioning earlier as well. It has a huge influence on you, and I think in case you think we're having anyone if anyone is having any challenges in building a relationship, you're very hardworking, you're very intelligent, but you're not getting through in your career, and or you have a brilliant idea and you're working very hard on it, but still you're not able to go the distance in your business. I think you need to look back. This could be one of the factors, that yes, ego could be one of the factors. Maybe you're not channelizing your ego well. Maybe you're not able to manage your ego well. And I think if we are being judgmental, if we are comparing to with others, and these could be the factors where we can see that yes, now we need to work on our ego. If we say that yes, we compare ourselves too much with others, we're jealous about others, our soul, it doesn't really need all these flashy cars, big houses, big businesses, brand names or anything else. Certainly it doesn't need. Like you gave an example of a child earlier. Now, does a 5-year-old kid or even an 8-year kid, do they really need that? Maybe ice cream for yes, but they're not focused on the brand of the ice cream or which restaurant do I get it from, right? But when we grow up, okay, now you would explain it better in all those technical terms, but then here comes our ego, oh, which watch I'm putting on, what's the cologne I'm wearing today, okay, what's the car I'm driving, where do I go, which restaurants do I visit, all these things, yes. So a kid is a 2-year-old or a 4-year-old, it has the same life, it has soul, it has 2 hands, eyes, everything. All those sensory organs it does have, it has the same soul. But I think eventually, as you're saying, yes, it could be inherent in us, but there are certain factors that influence that. And yes, we're driven by our ego. Please.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And there's the plus side. So let's talk about the positive aspects of an ego.
Sure.
And when we talk about, when you said, and it triggered by you saying, if you're not getting ahead in your career, there is having self-confidence is very important. Carrying yourself a certain way, being, if it's in your field of work, having a level of assertiveness in the kind of work that you do or how you respond to certain challenges, that's also very important too. And some people may say, if you have a high level of self-confidence, they may say, oh, this is that person has so much ego. But it's not necessarily the case, because you're just presenting yourself very well and having a good level of self-confidence. So this is also very important. So you need to build yourself and your self-confidence and in who you are, in what what your values are, or what your capabilities are. Those are also very important. Some people may perceive it to be high ego, but it's not necessarily, because you need to do that with your, I think someone once said, oh, she's got an ego. And I thought that was an interesting thing to say, because I felt like I didn't feel like I did, but then I realized, sometimes when you show up with a level of self-confidence, some people may think that, and that doesn't necessarily mean to be the case, because it's also, certain times when you say something, it's really how you feel, not necessarily what's the reality of the situation. So there's that balance too. So when you look at what it means, it's really important to have that self-reflection of, am I somebody who gives my time to people too, as much as I expect attention, or so there's that level of importance too. So going to superego, which is also important, because the superego helps you balance everything out as well. And when you look at how a superego is also developed, it's important to know that, again, that also has to do with society and culture. So your superego are your morals, your ethics, your upbringing, your inner values. They're internalized based on, again, what you're taught, what you think is appropriate, perhaps your spirituality, your religion. All those things affect it. And over time, of course, your role models, it's sometimes people have their parents as their role model, or somebody they know in their family, or somebody in history or in the news. They think that, when they look at those role models and how they have their careers, or how they behave, or, how the way they react to life, they become role models to aspire to. Another way is to be able to understand where are these values coming from, how appropriate are they, and are they preventing you from living, or are they enhancing your lifestyle? Like, you have specific values that you're not going to cross the boundaries, and those values will go into your personal relationships, will go for yourself, will go into business, and those are things that you're just like, this is where I draw the line. And that's important to have, and that helps you manage, that helps the ego manage that rationality of what the id wants, what society is able to accept, and what you're able to accept for yourself.
Okay, and let me ask you another question here. You were mentioning this point earlier as well, sometimes people want, especially you've been in politics before as well, and everyone is looking for a speaking opportunity there. They want to be on the stage, they want, and obviously they want people to acknowledge them. It's all about branding, and I know once you spoke of this as well, at the federal or provincial level, yes, there are party backing up, but at the municipal level, it's all about your brand. So you've seen that phase, but now you're calmer, you relax, you take it easy, okay, fine, all is hunky-dory. How do you manage that? How do you really channelize or manage that ego?
How do you manage? So the self-confidence is important. If you're going to be in a public arena, whether you're a public official or somebody who's striving to be one by being a candidate, or if you even are in media, like right now, when you do your shows on TV or when you speak on the radio, there needs to be some level of self-confidence, some assertiveness in your voice and how you present yourself that comes across, because really what you're saying to society is, hi, elect me or nominate me as somebody who can manage to make good decisions on your behalf. Or I'm an expert if it's for any topic, I'm an expert in this topic, or I'm well versed in this topic. You need to show up that way, because that's how we've been conditioned, right? Because we go to school, we see our teacher stands in front of the classroom, shows with authorities. A teacher doesn't teach a lesson like 2 + 2 = 4. They don't say it with a question mark, right? They tell you, they explain it to you. Your parents, when they're telling you stuff, they're not like unsure of what they're saying. They look like they know what they're talking about. And so I think it comes from just being naturalized that way, that if we believe someone's going to take a leadership role in anything, whether they're an author in a topic, whether they're a public official, whether a police officer, whatever, somebody, a judge, a lawyer, whatever the case is, people who are going to take decisions and think on your behalf, let's just say, or explain things to mass population, whether if you're a teacher or whatever those roles are, then you need to show up with a good level of confidence. And it's not ego, because what we understand ego culturally is id. Like if somebody is, just wants attention or talks about themselves all the time, that takes away from their level of expertise. So for example, if this conversation today, food for thought, if we decided to say, hey, we're going to talk about this topic, but then we spend most of the time just talking about ourselves or promoting ourselves, or just, and it's intention as well. Like, people can tell what is, like, where are you coming from? It sounds like you're doing more self-promotion than conversation or education. It's very easy in a conversation to be able to tell that, but also when it comes to the self-reflection, because that's a big key, like, you got to also self-reflect. Aside from getting feedback from others, there's self-reflection. If I ask myself, what is my intention to do this? And that's important, because if my intention to do something is for attention, then I've already lost the battle, because then I'm not really going to do a good job, because there is something that I want out of it that's going to really serve my id versus what. So the intention is very important. If my intention is to serve and do something that is for the betterment of society or for that situation, then my tone will be different, the choice of words I'll have will be different, how I appear will be different. Intention will always determine the outcome of anything. If my intention is something that's not positive, then the outcome will not be. Like, I believe that everything's a mirror. So my intention is where everything starts anyway. So I really realize, like, if I usually want to do something, I'll check in with myself and say, what's your intention? Is it to like serve your your id and feel good about yourself? Because you can feel good about yourself doing things for yourself. You don't necessarily need to get attention from others to feel good about yourself. If that's the case, then there are insecurities that you got to deal with, that you're insecure about, so you want to fill the hole. Why do we eat so much? It's to fill the hole in our soul. Like, why do you, if you excessively drink, if you excessively eat, if you excessively do anything, it's to fill the hole in your soul. It's not because your body needs it. It's not because you really need it. Anything that goes towards an addiction of some sort, even if you feel like you're not addicted, but you're overdoing it, then you're filling in things through the wrong channel. Like, instead of doing it the right way by actually doing the self-reflection, addressing, like, why do I feel like I need so much attention? Why do I feel like everybody needs to know I'm great, or I have this skill, or whatever, or I have this vehicle, which really means status. Like, if I go and buy, a $250,000 car or a $500,000 car, it's status, right? That car is going to drive the same way as well, not the same way, but it's going to take you, to your destination. It's, as a $30,000 car, mind you, it'll be maybe a little more comfortable, have more perks and this and that, but really it's a status symbol, because a $100,000 car could do that too, right? So there's certain things that so you have to ask yourself, like, why do I need it? Like, there's sometimes where you're like, well, I have it because I love, craftsmanship in this vehicle and the perks it has, and I worked hard for it and I earned it, and that's good. There's no knocking you. But if you take a picture of it because the intention is just so you could be praised, so everybody knows what your net worth is, that's the intention. If you don't have the intention, but you want to share this craftsmanship because you have one of a kind and they only make 3 of them in the world, okay, then it's like having a treasure that you want to show the world. It's like going to a museum. Not everybody has it, so it's nice to be able to see it and maybe inspire somebody. So really your intention is like really key, why you're doing something.
Yeah, very nicely explained. And I guess as you were just mentioning all these things, so if someone really, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think if someone really wants to know where do they stand on the ego scale, is it absolutely 0? Is it 1, 2, 4, 5, or 10 being, yes, you're really ego driven? So, and you've not managed your ego well, as you were saying, that you could have a good side of the ego as well, but if you're not really managed your ego, I think a few things would be like, yes, you cannot be a good listener. If not a good listener, then maybe ego could be one of the reasons. Other thing is that, yes, you think you're always right.
Yes.
And then you have anger issues as well. So yes, that another thing which comes out from ego. You're comparing yourself too much with others, and you're not able to accept anyone else as they are. You want to change everything. You want them to work according to you. So I think all these really traits are of someone whose ego level is a little bit high, and they need to manage that.
But then what's really remarkable is that you think their ego level's high, but really that's a mask for their insecurity.
Okay.
And so it's projected like it's high, and you assume that somebody who has high ego must feel so great, but alternatively, or the opposite of that is that they don't feel so great. Because if I were to think, if I were to change everybody or want everybody to change around me, that means I'm so uncomfortable with myself and where I am and with everybody else, and I don't know how to manage my own emotions and how I feel, so I want everybody else to change what they're doing to make me happy. That means I do not have the capability to understand how to manage my emotions. So I make that other people's problems by saying, you make me happy, as opposed to it's my responsibility to make myself happy, or it's my responsibility to calm myself, or it's my responsibility, to find a level of peace. But instead I say, no, I want to have discontent within me, so you guys, as my entertainment, will change yourselves to make me happy, to give me peace. And that's my insecurity. If it's, so yeah, it's perceived as high ego, but really that's like a front. It's theatrics. Like it's so it's so easy to assume that somebody who is perceived to have high ego feels so great about themselves, but it's really the opposite. Or for example, somebody who's quick to anger. Well, what does that mean? That means you cannot give yourself a chance to think about what you're feeling, why you're feeling it, what's caused it. And if you say, well, it's so-and-so, well, did you consider it's how that so-and-so made you feel because of your perception of what that thing was? There's a famous saying, and it you know, I forget who says it, but it's, you know, there's like 1% of what happens and 99% of how you perceive it, right? Because really, like anything could happen. I could look at it as a blessing or the opposite of it. And so instead of like somebody who gets quick to anger, hasn't learned from a child who has tantrums because they cry when they want food because they're a child and they're new to this world. But if I'm a grown adult and I'm crying by crying I mean getting angry, that means I haven't learned to ask myself, you know, what's wrong? I don't know I don't have coping skills to process all of that. So that's, of course, a weakness. And so it could appear like I've got high ego, but really it's a weakness and an insecurity. The other thing that you mentioned was if I think I'm always right, that just means that I'm so insecure of hearing anybody else's ideas that may ruin my identity, because my beliefs, I could have my beliefs be my identity, and therefore my beliefs show that I'm well established, well learned, well educated, and any contradiction of that idea will threaten my concept of myself, my view of the world. Then I'm not a flexible person. That's again a weakness, and that shows the insecurity completely. Because if you're secure with who you are and what you believe, why wouldn't you want to expand your world by listening to someone else? They may have some good viewpoints that you didn't even think about, because there's so many universities, there's so many schools, there's so many books, there's so many scholars, there's so many teachers, there's so many topics. Like, you don't know everything. And even if like you go to your doctor, right? You go to your family doctor, and then sometimes you realize, my doctor graduated medical school 30 years ago, but there's so many advances in like the holistic world and so many different types of medicine that perhaps they don't know about, right? And I'm not generalizing this about doctors, but I'm trying to say is, even somebody who's an expert in their field, they also need to catch up with what's happening in their field, and are they going back and, you know, learning new things and getting new certifications, or whatever the case is, if it's a designated occupation. So you cannot think you're right about everything, because you're not God. Like, impossible, that's the case. So if you act that way, then that shows also your insecurity. So these are all parts of self-reflection to be able to handle that. Because being human is not easy, because you have all of these feelings and emotions. So how do you make it easier for yourself? By learning how your mind works, how your body works, and knowing how to manage all these things.
Yeah, very nicely explained at this point. And you know, we'll also discuss that how do you make sure that you manage ego? How do you make sure that you channelize ego? And I think the best way is to stay humble. We'll talk about that in another episodes, about humility, how to stay humble. But I think after doing all the obvious, that yes, we have to work hard, we have to take care of our health, we have to take care of our knowledge, career, education. I think the number one thing, if anybody would ask me that, Yudhvir, after education, healthcare, all the boxes, basic boxes ticked, what is the number one thing that you would recommend for a total transformation in personality? There's so many things that we need to work on after the basic obvious things. I think the number one thing is, how do you manage your ego? How do you channelize your ego? And how to stay very, very humble. That's the number one thing. And why I'm saying that number one thing, hopefully when we talk about humility and how to be humble, we'll talk about that as well. Please.
And I have to say, you're probably the best person to give the answer to that. If you want to manage, if you feel like your ego is imbalance and you're driven by your id and you have all these other, circumstances that you're dealing with where you get, emotionally upset or you're abrupt and all those things, the number one way is, and you're the expert in this, I have to say, is gratitude. Gratitude is the massive shift in me, because you can't have empathy before you have gratitude. You can't be humble before you have gratitude. And everything just comes down to having that gratitude. And I know we did a whole episode on gratitude and it was phenomenal. And so I'm going to leave you to talk about that, because that is your number one shift in like your energy, your consciousness, your awareness. It feeds your super ego, it tames your id, it helps your ego balance everything that needs to happen within you and the external world, and how you get what you want but still live in this world and be a contributing person to it. Gratitude.
Yeah. Thank you first of all for that. And we'll talk about more when we talk about how to be humble and humility. And I will certainly agree that yes, if I think, because why I said it, that this is the number one thing we need to work on other than the basic things, your education, your health and everything. Because I think so if I'll attribute my well-being or happiness or anything else, I think I'll attribute it to being humble. The number one thing is channelizing the ego, and it's inherent, as you just explained, but yes, doing that. And also, I'm not trying to reciprocate here, I've seen you and it's amazing how could you stay so calm, could you stay so grounded, be humble, despite I would say you've seen it all. That's all I can say. Yes, you've seen it all, and now not having really that desire or not the id factor to do this, that, and I've seen the transformation in you, and it's amazing how you aligned so well within your soul. It's an amazing experience, and I sure want you to say something about that, and we'll talk more about when we talk about being humble. Please.
Thank you. That's so kind of you. These are my opinion, and so from my experience is that we're here on Earth, and there's two ways things can go. There's the way that it's forced on you to learn something, and then the other way is that you do it voluntarily. And as you grow up, of course, your parents tell you to study, and they force you to do certain stuff. They hope it turns into a habit, so you do it on your own. But there's a whole bunch of like self-growth that they don't teach you in school about your aspects of your personality. Like school really just teaches you how to go and be a good worker in society, right? Whether you start a business or you work for a business, or you work for, it just teaches you how to know which trade or skills to go and be a productive tax-paying member of society. It doesn't necessarily, I don't know now because I graduated school a long time ago, and I'm talking about like high school, elementary school. It doesn't teach you about all these other emotions that you're going through, and perhaps maybe now because of the times that we're in. So in life, certain things will happen, and if you're not taking the appropriate voluntary steps to learn these things, work on yourself, and evolve, and hopefully have the growth that you need. And by growth, I mean just understand more, have more patience, show more kindness, all those things, and how you get there, and how you, aside from what happens to you in life, how you perceive it, how you take every incident, and how you react appropriately to it, not in a fake way, but in a genuine way because you feel it on the inside. That takes, either life circumstances can push you, and it could push you like so down that you have no way then to go up, and that's by learning these things the hard way. And whether you go and seek therapy, or you read self-help books, or you really spend some time into it, just like how you spend time watching a movie. If you spend that 2 hours doing self-work, then it really takes you far, because that movie may be exciting for that hour and a half, 2 hours, or if it's a Hindi film, 3 hours, and it'd be exciting in that moment, but you may think about it a little bit afterwards. But if you take that same time and you really invest in yourself in terms of learning some of these things and reflecting and journaling and doing some, self-help stuff, then that's life lasting. That will last you for the rest of your life. So really, how are you spending your time? And I'm not saying don't do that, but have that balance to do that. So for me, I think I was pushed at first through certain life circumstances where I needed to learn how to manage my emotions, or what were my emotions, why do I feel this way, and in a consumer world where now we're like very connected through the net and social media. Of course you want things and you're driven, and then your ego comes in and you strategize and you plan and you execute, and that has its own reward system in this world. And then did I do all of that at the cost of my health, relationships, happiness, peace of mind, all those things? And then those are things you learn, I think, over time. And then you make a decision. How much balance do I want in my life, and how much do I want to be grounded as a person, so I don't have future health problems, or I don't have circumstances that don't make me happy. And I think it all comes down to, we said this before, like, how do you know you have a good goal? And you have a good goal based on the person you become in the process of achieving that goal. Because any goal that you achieve, whether it's like weight loss, or whether it's to finish a certain degree, or whether it's a business goal or whatever, personal goal, that thing makes you happy. When you reach that goal, and I mean something measurable, or like you want to run a marathon, when you reach that goal, you may be very excited about it, and it may be very good for your ego, because you accomplished something and other people acknowledge you for accomplishing that one thing. But that's very short-lived. Who you become in that process is what matters. So for example, if my goal is to run a marathon, and the person that I become by finishing that marathon is a healthier person who knows what to eat, when to eat, how to eat, knows how to nourish their body, knows how to get activity, but also rest time, then that's a really good goal. But if my goal is to make sure that my net worth is $7 billion, and I just got to reach that goal, how I get there is also, what's that person that I become in the process of getting there? So if that's just my goal and doesn't matter how I get there, then the type of person I probably become by reaching that, maybe not somebody that I would like so much, or would not be so proud of to show, or maybe my circumstances or relationships will really be proof of the type of person that I am. So really, I think that's what it comes down to. Like, what is your goal? And that's how you know if it's a good goal or not such a good goal.
Yeah, very nicely explained. Yeah, I've seen that with you. You actually nailed it, that yes, your goal is important, but so is what sort of person you would become while you aspire for that goal, while you're working on that goal. And I think in recent years, earlier I used to be very goal-oriented, output-oriented, but now I think I've detached the outcome. I've totally detached the outcome. Most of the time, do I set my goals, but most of the time I'm really focused what I'm doing right now. And as long as I believe that yes, I'm doing fine, and it's for a bigger purpose, I've attached those things with it. And I think that helps me, be grounded. And my final thoughts, I know we're running out of time, and we'll listen to your final thoughts and wrap it up here. My final thoughts on this one would be that yes, definitely, if we are in this zone, because always aspire to be in zone 0, it's inherent. You said it right. I don't think so we can really get rid of ego. So as long as on a scale of 0 to 10, if it's closer to 0, it's great. But just in case you're feeling, judgmental about someone, you said a very good word, your tone, your choice of words. These are very important. In case you feel that I cannot do anything wrong, I'm always right, I cannot say sorry. You cannot forgive people. It's very difficult for you to forgive people. And in case you're having troubles, despite all the basic boxes checked in your career, in your relationship and business, then yes, maybe ego is a challenge. And in our next episode, we'll talk about that, how to stay humble, and we'll talk about humility. Your final thoughts.
Thank you so much. I think it's always a pleasure for me to have these conversations because it's so good to know what they're called, what do they do, what's their function, so I can be more in command of how I live my life, how I feel and my thoughts, and of course that will carry out with my actions. So it's always a pleasure to spend this time with you on Food for Thought. Thank you again. It's always a pleasure to have these conversations and hear from your experiences as well. And as always, thank you to our guests who are always with us for these conversations, and we'd love to hear your feedback anytime at Y Media.
Thank you.